is very excited to welcome Greg Magick Bernstein of Sacred Voyages. Magick will be talking about intuition for hiring, business growth, and change. Just to give you a little bit of background information on Magick before we get him started, he comes from a highly successful and rather traditional business background. He was nominated for the Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award and serves on the board of directors of Young Entrepreneurs. He has successfully owned and manages several businesses, and in the same space at that same time was working to develop his depth of knowledge on intuition, and based on that brings you that expertise today. I'm going to go ahead and turn the screen over to Magick at this time, and we will let him take over on the presentation. So for those of you that are in the audience, just want to let you know, because of the number of people on the call, we are keeping you in the mute-only mode. What that means is that when you have a question, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and type it into the question panel that is on your screen in your control box. I will be monitoring those questions and feeding them to Magick. Sometimes we'll have a chance to feed him as he goes, and sometimes I'll be saving those till the end. We'll just see how it's working based on the flow. So definitely want your questions. Please do type them into that panel. And Magick, over to you. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you. I am just taking a moment trying to get the PowerPoint up that I would like up, and then I'll begin.
All right, excellent. Gotta love all this technology with the webinars, right?
Okay, sorry about that. I'm ready now. Thank you, Kathy, and I'm really pleased and privileged to be on the call with all of you today. I just wanted to take just a moment as I get started and let you know about my style of sharing and teaching information. I come from a background of teachers that taught through the format of storytelling. And through the storytelling format, there is often a transmission of the energy, the frequency, and of the information that happens through the sound. And it engages both the conscious and unconscious mind at a much deeper level, and has a very powerful impact. So I'll be sharing a little bit through that storytelling format as well as through some left brain as well. Kathy mentioned that my background is traditional business, and that's true. It's only recently that I've realized that my calling in life is actually inner guidance or intuition, and I was pursuing that the entire time that I had a traditional business, but it wasn't what I was actually teaching people until the last, say, at least professionally teaching people until the last, say, 7 years or so. Before that, I was volunteering for maybe 15 years of learning and teaching this sort of stuff. I remember the first time that I really kind of consciously got the power of inner guidance or intuition in business, and that was really when my mom and I used to play the stock market together. And we both noticed a pattern that she intuitively knew what stocks were going to do. She knew if they were going to go up or if they were going to go down, and it had nothing to do with the logic or reasoning around purchasing the stocks. And so it wasn't always easy for us to follow her intuition because it sometimes was right in the face of logic and reasoning and PE ratios and all that sort of stuff. But she was right way more than she was wrong, and had we followed her intuitive knowing more of the time, we'd have been very rich. So, you know, I started to apply it in my business. I've had a number of very successful businesses. The last traditional one was an ad agency that I built up to many millions of revenue. It was an international business. It had offices in New York, and Miami, and Dallas. And I started my businesses with no money. Well, actually, the first one with $2,000. And the first two that I had were, you know, I'd say marginally successful. And the reason that this third one kicked into a lot of success at least for me anyway, was that I started to follow my intuition. I mean, even actually moving into that particular business versus other businesses was actually an intuitive thing. I was guided specifically to go into this particular business, even though I didn't like the model. And then early on in the business, I had people coming out to my office from some of the vendors that we were trading with. And, you know, I tended to kind of operate as if I was already a large business because I knew that one of the barriers to entry was these guys didn't like to do business with startups. And so I wouldn't let people know I was a startup unless, of course, they asked me directly. And one day I had this gentleman in my office, and I just had this powerful intuition that I should tell him that I had just started. And so I did. I told him I had just started, and I really actually didn't know what I was doing, which was a very vulnerable thing to do. He was with a very large billboard company, and I was in the billboard business. And so it was fascinating what happened next, though, because instead of a reaction like, oh, well, you know, we really don't want to do business with you then, and, you know, tell me about your creditworthiness, and let me see your bank account, things like that. Instead, the guy said, you know what, let me tell you a little secret. My dad was one of the people who actually started the industry that you're in. And he's out of the industry now, and I worked there since the time I was 5 years old. And by the way, the slides that you're seeing are slides I put together on Hawaii and Mount Shasta that are from powerful places. I lead retreats in Hawaii and Mount Shasta. They're shamanic retreats, inner guidance retreats. They have to do with going to the land where there are powerful places. You know, like the land in some places is just different than others. Like the parking lot at Walmart feels different than the top of Machu Picchu or the Himalayas, right? It's just there's a different energy there. And so some of these places in Hawaii and Mount Shasta, the land actually amplifies our connection to intuition. And that's where I take people on retreats, and I'm showing you these slides in hopes that some of that energy will actually be translated to you, the viewer. And the people that you're seeing are people on these retreats. So anyway, the guy says, you know, I worked there my whole life practically, and how about if I teach you the business? I said, okay. And he spent the next 4.5 hours in my office downloading to me all the questions that I had unanswered inside of me that were causing me challenge and problems. And I was concerned that I might not even be able to be successful in the business because I didn't understand some of the inner workings of it. And he explained all that to me and then spent hours and hours every week on the phone with me, teaching me the business, sending me contracts and paperwork and all kinds of things that I needed. And he did it all for free. And I even offered him equity in my company because I felt so, just so grateful that he had done that for me, and he turned it down. And so that was the beginning of me realizing that following this part, this part deep inside of me, was a very powerful thing to do. And I want to step you through for just a moment here what I'm actually talking about when I say intuition. Because I'm going to share with you a lot of stories of how this can be really powerful in business. But first I want to show you what I'm speaking about. So this first slide that hopefully you're seeing on the screen now, it's basically how many of us make decisions. Most of us make decisions from one slice of a pie of many things that we can make decisions from. So here on this first slide, I'm showing you the typical ways that people make decisions. Most people are making them through logic and reasoning. That's their primary way of making decisions. They weigh things out, they weigh the pros and cons, they see if the pros outweigh the cons, and they go with that decision. Some other ways are, you know, practical considerations like, can I get time off of work? You know, what about my kids? You know, how about the money involved in this? Do I have the money? Sometimes our wants or our attachments to things are what make our decisions. You know, we just want things. or we're attached to it. It's like, I'm really attached to taking a vacation this year. Our emotions come into play, our fears. Sometimes we don't make decisions that we know are the right decisions because we're afraid, because we don't know anything in life ultimately. There's a whole list of things here. I'm not going to go through these in detail. I just want you to see that this is how we're typically making our decisions, and I go over this in much more detail in my classes. So typically, as mentioned, it's one slice of this greater pie of the things we can make decisions from, or it's multiple slices. So we have here logic and reasoning is coming into play. Maybe I don't quite have the money to spend on this thing. I'm a little afraid because it's uncertain as to whether it's going to be successful. I've got the habit of making decisions a certain way. I really have a want to be comfortable. And the rapport slice there, maybe people won't like this decision. So that's how decisions are usually made. Now, these are the things that are typically left out when we make decisions from that place, because what I postulate is that basically there's this holistic totality of a place that we can make decisions from that I call making them from our higher self or from source or from our deeper knowingness. And when we make decisions from that place, it takes into account all those things that were in the pie, like logic and wants and reasoning and time and money. But additionally, it takes into account something that is really unexplainable to us. This part of us is omnipotent. It's timeless. It doesn't know a past, a present, or a future. It's limitless. It basically knows no bounds. And like I said, I myself can't even explain how or why this is true. I think if you begin looking into quantum physics, you'll see that by the principles of non-locality and some of the other principles in modern physics today, that there's actually no separation between any of us or any time and space that's ever existed. And perhaps looking into that can explain why this is. But what I found for myself was that looking at the whys only stopped me. When we ask why, it calls for justification. It calls for us to stop and kind of dig a position out and begin to explain that position. So I basically just let the whys go and decided, well, what happens if I just try this stuff out and don't need to know why? And that's when my life started taking off, and the clients began showing up, and the sales went through the roof, because I let go of the need to know how intuition works and just decided to practice it. And so from there, I got to this place here where I'm making what I call the highest choice. It doesn't discount logic or reasoning. It includes it along with everything else. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about intuition, is making decisions from this greater place, from this place of I call it omnipotence. And so just getting the PowerPoint back to where I want it to be. So now that I've explained that a little bit, I'd like to give you some examples of just how powerful this has been in my business life. Of course, it's made a huge difference in every area of my life. If I were to draw a little pie chart and pie out the different areas of my life, health and relationships and career and wealth and partnerships and all the things that are important, I'm at very high levels of fulfillment in all of those areas, and I attribute that in large part to being able to follow my intuition, which has come from a practice. And so today we're going to talk about growth and change and in the business context. And so there's been so many ways that it has helped in the growth of my business, and I've seen it in help grow other people's business. One of the ways is that when I owned my advertising agency, I was one of the primary quote-unquote salespeople or business development people. So it was my responsibility partially to bring in new customers and clients. And I noticed that I would go out and prospect. I'd drive around the city I lived in, and I'd write down the names of advertisers I would see out on billboards and other advertising. And I'd look for the criteria that I knew would be good customers for me. smaller businesses that were growing, that were starting to advertise more, the basic things anybody would look for when prospecting in my business. And then I go back to my office and I have a very long list of prospects and I just start calling them. And, maybe 15% of those would end up being customers of mine. Well, one of my teachers, I was watching her lecture one time and she said that she had an 80% closing ratio when she was in the advertising business. And this was a spiritual teacher of mine, and so that fascinated me. So I asked her, how did you do that? How did you have an 80% closing ratio? And she said to me, I only called on people who were going to buy. Now that fascinated me. How did you only call on people who were going to buy? And, her answer was fascinating. She used to pick up the yellow pages. Now, she was selling a different kind of advertising than I was. But she would pick up the yellow pages and just start flipping through it until her inner guidance told her to stop at a particular page, and then she would have her finger guided to a particular page, and that's who she would call. That was amazing to me. So I thought, I have no idea how you can do that, but I'm going to give it a try. So I started driving around, and I would see if anything stood out to me more than anything else. And you know what? It did. As I started driving around the city I lived in, I would notice that certain billboards, it was as if they were calling to me, like, hey, Greg, call me. I need your help. I'm overwhelmed. Our business is going through the roof and we're growing into new markets and we can't handle it. We need someone to help us with our advertising. That's what it was like for me. And certain billboards would have like a glow about them, or they would just look different, and I would be pulled to them. Now, for a while, I actually didn't act on it. I just noticed it. I was just sort of playing around in the realm. But then what would happen is maybe 4, 5, 6 months later, I'd be driving around prospecting, and I would see that billboard that had called to me 6 months ago. Suddenly, instead of having one billboard, they now had 20. And I was like, okay, something to this. So I started calling on those that called to me. And what happened was my closing ratio shot up from about 15% to 80%. So I was able to do what she was doing. And by the way, my workload just completely disappeared, basically. I started working far less hours, actually, because instead of calling 50 prospects to get 5 or 10 of them to become a customer, now I actually called 4, and I'd get 2 or 3 to become my customer, or sometimes 4 to become my customer. It basically eliminated about, 80% of my workload in terms of bringing in new business. And by the way, the customers that I brought in were amazing customers. I loved my customers, and that's another area that went through the roof when I began using my intuition, was customer service. Because, there's a lot to what to say and when to say it to customers. For example, one of my longest customers, oldest customers, was a very large fashion company that had some very high-profile billboards that they placed with me. They spent about $1 million a year with me, and I had a very close relationship with them. And they were somewhat demanding in their needs, and when they called and they said jump, I always asked how high. I took their calls immediately, and I handled whatever they needed immediately. And one day I had done something to delay something that was happening in the business, and I knew they weren't going to be happy about it. And I would like to have done it differently, but I couldn't. And so he called me on the phone, and the receptionist said that it was him on the phone. my intuition told me not to pick up the phone. And so I did not. I did not, because I knew that he would be really hot under the collar. And normally, when he was hot under the collar, I picked up the phone and you know, I listened to it and talked about it. But this time I was guided not to. And, you know, sometimes you don't get to know why when you follow guidance. Your life just gets easier. And ultimately, I don't know why I didn't take that call that day. But as I reflect back on it, I suspect that I might have gotten fired that day. He kept calling back. He called back a couple of times more that day, and he called the next day, and I didn't return his calls. This was highly irregular. I always returned his call same day, usually almost immediately. I didn't call him back for about 5 days. And, you know, it took a lot of composure for me to do that. I mean, this is after building my faith and my trust in my intuition over a long period of time. I mean, because following intuition is a practice. You don't just start following it full out right away. It takes building the muscle of faith over time, and I built it pretty good by this time, so I really trusted. And so by the time I picked up the phone and called him, and we had a conversation, he didn't even bring it up. He was so nice and cordial, and we just talked about the things that we needed to talk about new projects and this and that, and at the end of our 20 or 30-minute call, he said, oh, and by the way, you know, I was pretty hot about what happened a few days ago, and it's probably good that we didn't talk on the phone then, and just don't let it happen again. And that was it. And so that was amazing. You know, I also had clients that sometimes I wouldn't talk to for a couple of years, 2-3 years at a time, because they were sporadic purchasers of outdoor advertising. And so they would buy a few billboards, and they would run for a few months for something they had going on, and then I wouldn't hear from them for years. And yet, sometimes I would just get a feeling, a powerful gut feeling that I needed to call one of those clients. And I would call them up, or I'd send them an email, and invariably, I would say 8-9 times out of 10, they would say, oh my God, your timing is so perfect. I need to purchase some billboards right now. And in a good chunk of percentage of that time, the amazing thing is that they would often say, and you know what, I misplaced your phone number because it's been so long since we talked, and I didn't know how to get a hold of you. So if I hadn't followed that intuition, I wouldn't have gotten that business. They wouldn't have gotten that level of customer service. In terms of, you know, managing and growing a business, there's a lot of different parts of the business that have to be attended to. And some of them you wouldn't even think about using your inner guidance, or that you would even do an analysis of. For example, one time, one of my salespeople and I went on a call to this large, well, you know, medium-sized company for the local economy, and they wanted to purchase a lot of billboards from us. You know, maybe it was a 20 billboard campaign, which was pretty sizable. They're an advertiser that we'd seen spending millions on TV for years. Seemed like it would be fantastic for us. But as we left the meeting on the way home in the car, I told my salesperson, that I did not feel that we should take the business, that intuitively I was having a very strong sense that they weren't going to pay their bills. And in our business, we were basically a broker of billboards and other outdoor advertising. So if these people wanted to buy $400,000 worth of billboards, we would actually buy those billboards from the vendors, sign for the $400,000, and then we'd have our clients sign with us. So essentially, we were on the hook for $400,000. And if we had a deal like that go bad, we could be out of business. And so it was a very rare thing that I had an intuition not to take business. It's hard to turn business down, especially big business like that appeared on its face to be quite a good company and a good set of business for us to take. But I got that, and so we actually said no to them, and they ended up buying their advertising directly with the vendors. And 6 months later, we found out from the vendors that they had defaulted on their contracts and did not pay their bills. And that would have been a very significant blow to our business. And I don't know that we would have recovered from that. And so there were actually, I would say, maybe twice a year that would happen. And that's significant because any one of those times, if we had taken on the business and the company had failed, it could have brought us down. So it's invaluable in places that we don't even think about that we might be using our inner guidance and our intuition. When, change is always a part of business. No matter what business we're in or no matter what part of life we're in, change is always happening. And even small things, like I remember I had a laptop computer that I had, and over and over again, I had the intuition that I needed to get a new laptop, that it was time to ship that. And so I just couldn't do it. I was busy, and I was used to my laptop, and I didn't want to shop for a new one, and I kept putting it off, and I kept having this over and over again, this knowing that came in many forms. I would have it in the form of a picture, and I would have it in the form of a feeling, and I would even have a voice inside of my head that would say, get a new laptop. And yet I just kept ignoring it, and I had moved into a stage in my business where I wasn't traveling much. So my logic told me that I didn't need a laptop, and yet I kept getting this clear information, and I was using the laptop quite a bit, so I have a lot of information stored on it. And of course, I'm sure you can already predict what happened, which is that soon thereafter the laptop crashed, and it was quite inconvenient, and I lost a significant amount of data. And it would have been so easy for me just to follow that part that gave me that information from someplace deep in my knowingness that I can't explain or know how it got there, but I just knew. And by the way, I've seen where people who are interested in writing books about the subject of intuition in business have actually surveyed a lot of the more successful CEOs of Fortune 500 companies and successful people in the business field and the investing field, and many of them attribute a part of their success to this intuition, this intangible piece that nobody can really explain. And the laptop is obviously something quite minor, but definitely an inconvenience. When I went to actually sell my business, which was a rather significant endeavor for me, it was a major factor. My investment banker came into my office one day, and he had a list of companies that he had brought in. And we had talked about that we were going to send what they call a book, which is information about your company being for sale. Actually, we weren't going to send the book. We were going to send a letter to a number of companies that we were going to select off of a list of with criteria that I had given him. And one of the criteria for the list that he was bringing was companies that had $100 million of revenue and up that were in the media business. And so he sat down across the table from me, and he handed me this list, and at the bottom of the list were a bunch of companies with an X drawn through them. And I asked him, what are these companies with the X drawn through them? And he said, well, my assistant accidentally printed out some companies that are over $100 million in revenue. And I said, okay, so we'll ignore those. And I went through the list, and I checked off the ones that I wanted to send a letter to. And then while we were chatting, I just was glancing at the list with the X over it, just something to do with my eyes as we talked. And on it, I saw a company. And I can't tell you the name of the company because of non-disclosure, but there was a company name on there that, as best I could tell, had nothing, the name of their company had nothing to do with the media industry. It was really quite a bizarre name. And I looked at it, and I just had this deep sense that we should send them a letter. And so I told the investment banker to please send them a letter, and he said no. And we got into an argument because he said, look, you gave me a criteria. They don't fit the criteria for more than one reason. And, I'm not getting paid here unless we sell this business. And I don't want to, continue to go down a road where I'm doing a lot of work that is beyond what we've agreed to. And at the end, I felt so strongly about it and had such an intuitive sense that he agreed and sent the letter. And, of course, that's the company that ended up buying my company. And so, how invaluable was that I followed my intuition there? I'd also like to share with you just a few examples of how intuition can be powerful in the area of hiring. I know that this is an important area for people who are in the business of anything, and especially if you're in the recruiting industry, interviewing people for a living, it could be extremely important. And so for me, I have extraordinary results that I can track in terms of my hiring. I remember I was hiring somebody back in probably the year 2000, and there was a guy who had all of the right reasons to hire him on paper and all of the right reasons to hire him in terms of our interview and his interview skills. He was personable. He was selling me on hiring him, which to me is something at the time that I thought was important. He kept following up with me, and he was a really nice guy. I liked him a lot, and it just seemed like everything, when I weighed it out with my logical mind, said hire him. And his expectation of salary was even lower than what I had available to pay. Just everything was quite right with the guy. And so I hired him. And I will say in retrospect that there was a part of me at a gut level that got, no, don't hire him. And yet, at the time, I was overwhelmed by the logical side of things. And, in a few minutes, I'm going to go through all of the things that can get in the way of our guidance, or at least I'm going to give you a little taste of that. And all of these same things that I went over with you earlier, the typical ways that we make decisions, are also the things that can get in the way of our guidance if we fixate on them as being primarily important. And I clearly had fixated upon the traditional kind of Franklin chart where you weigh out somebody's pros and cons. And there were all pros and very little cons, and everything seemed from that perspective to be a go. And I went with that, and it was a mistake, and I'll tell you how it was a mistake in a moment. There was another guy that I hired at a similar time period, and this guy, what happened was he was overqualified for the job. He had been in a sales job prior to this where he'd been making a tremendous amount of money and was very successful at it. And because of the shift in the economy, he'd lost his job, not for any reason around his performance. He was an older gentleman, so he had a family and a mortgage and a lot of responsibility. And he needed double the base salary as to what I had available to pay at that time. And so it was completely outside of my my parameters and my logic and my reasoning and everything to hire this guy. However, in this particular situation, I was very tuned in with my intuition. And my intuition was very strong to hire him, to do whatever it took to hire him, to borrow money, to move money from one place to another place, to cut my salary, anything that I could do to hire him. And, on paper, while he was quite successful at his previous job, there were actually some parts of what he'd been doing and of his personality and character that had me wondering whether he would be good at the job that I was actually interviewing him for. So I had some suspicions from my logical mind, but my intuitiveness was 100% go. And so I trusted it, and I hired him. And what happened with these two gentlemen is an incredible story for me in terms of validating my inner guidance, because the first gentleman that I hired, the one that I really had a gut feeling not to hire, but yet I did, and ended up that, and by the way, this stuff applies to firing as well, because soon after I hired the first guy, within a month or two, I knew deep inside me that it was time to fire him, that he was not doing what I needed him to do, and that in fact he was sometimes saying things to people that could be detrimental to our business and to our reputation. And yet, I did not fire him. Why didn't I fire him? Because of my emotions, because I didn't want to cause him pain, because I wanted to believe that he could change, because it was just easier to keep him on than to fire him and go through the interview process and find and train somebody else. A lot of reasons, all of which ran right in the face of what I call the truth, because the truth was to fire him, and I knew that deep inside. And so I kept him on, and kept him on for a long time, and maybe a year and a half into him working with me, it happened. He said something to a client that wasn't true, that got back to a billboard company that was one of our primary vendors, essential to our business. That billboard company was livid, came to my office and said, we will no longer do business with you. And that should have been the death knell of my company, because a large chunk of our business was with them, and really our ability to do business for our clients was dependent on our ability to purchase billboards from the big billboard vendors, and this was one of the biggest. And so I fired him, which at that point was easy. What happened next was another testament to intuition and inner guidance, because my employees wanted to implement these strategies to continue to do business with this billboard company in a surreptitious way so that they wouldn't know it was us. And I said no to that, and I followed my intuition, which told me what to do. I won't get into the details of that strategy, but I had a strategy. None of them really believed that my strategy was the right strategy, but my intuition said it was, and they were all loyal to me and trusted me even though they didn't believe it, and they stayed, and the strategy worked. It's just countlessly, over and over again, inner guidance has saved me, has brought in clients, has made my customers happy, has saved us money, has put us on the right track. The guy that I hired that I couldn't afford, and that I really had to shift some things around to hire him, well, something I never could have predicted with my logical mind. And this is the thing about intuition and inner guidance, is that you never know when you follow it what it actually might do for you. Right? So you never get to know where it's taking you or why it's taking you. I mean, sometimes you get to know, but many times you don't. And what happened with this particular guy is that it ends up that when I sold my business, part of why I was able to sell it was because of this guy. Because he had developed from what I hired him for, which was a salesperson, into my general manager. And he was actually running the business. And at the time that I sold it, their criteria, the buyer, was we want this business to be running on its own without you. You know, we want to be able to take it on and not take you on. And so the fact that you have somebody in place that knows the business, that's running the business, that will come with the business is essential to us. And so him being there was, I can't even tell you how key it was. And I could have never, ever known that he was going to develop into that and that he was going to be so important. So I've talked quite a bit about how intuition and inner guidance can be important in your life. And hopefully through some of the stories that I've shared, it's illustrated to you what could happen for you in terms of whatever business you're in and whatever endeavor you're in life. Hopefully it's sparked in you some curiosity and some motivation to explore it. And so now that I've done that, I want to tell you just a little bit about, how do you do this? Like, what are the steps? What's the path for you to develop this, to be able to use this in your business? And I have a weekend workshop which presents an entire path to consciously living your intuition in every moment. And I'm going to tell you some of the steps that I teach in that weekend class. Now, obviously, I'm not going to be able to fully develop it for you during a webinar, but I'd like to give you the steps so that you can begin to work with these steps in your own life in whatever way you can. And before we go, I'll also give you just a little bit of specific take-home practices or exercises that you can take on. So step one is you've got to get to know your intuition and get to know what I call it inner guidance, because I think inner guidance is a bit broader than intuition, and perhaps I'll explain that more in a bit. But you've got to be able to get to know your inner guidance really well. If somebody called me on the phone, if one of you called me on the phone tomorrow and you tried to impersonate my mother, I can guarantee you that it wouldn't work. I can guarantee you that I know my mother's voice as distinguished from anyone else's voice. I mean, even if they're trying to impersonate her, I'm not going to mistake them for my mother. And that's the kind of relationship that I have with my own inner guidance as well. I know it like the back of my hand. We get our inner guidance through our internal experience, and it comes in a particular form or structure. We all see things inside of our mind's eye. We hear things inside of our mind's eye, and we feel things. And so, for example, if I'm walking down a trail, hiking in the woods, and I come to a fork in the trail, and I don't know which way to go, often I'll use my inner guidance. Now, sometimes for me, what will happen is that one fork or one trail will just look a little brighter. The green shrubbery will look a little greener, and that's how I'll know it's the trail. Or in my mind's eye, I'll see a picture of which one to go down. Or sometimes I'll have a gut feeling. When I consider going down the left trail, I'll feel a warm, expansive feeling in my gut. And yet when I consider going down the other trail, I'll have a constricting, contracting, cool feeling in my gut. That tells me the yes or the no. Or other times, I might have a voice in my head. I have my inner guidance voice, and it's in the same place. It's right behind my head. So locationally, I know where it is. And it's the same voice every time. It's a man's voice, and it talks softly, and it has the same tone and the same pitch and the same volume every time. So what I recommend for people to do is to sit down and have a practice where you just sit down with yourself and you close your eyes and you remember a time when you were guided, a time when you had intuition. All of us have had one of these times, where it's a perfectly sunny day, and as you're walking to leave the house, I mean, I had this happen when I lived in Arizona, and it was sunny every day, and I'm going to leave the house, and I hear, get an umbrella. And I'm thinking, why would I get an umbrella it's perfectly sunny, and it's almost always perfectly sunny. And yet it was very clear. And I wasn't working with my inner guidance back then, and I didn't have any consciousness around this, but I acted on it because it was so strong. I grabbed the umbrella, even though it didn't make any sense. And of course, it rained that day. So we all have even the simplest things like that, where someone's called us on the phone and we knew who it was before we picked it up. Simple things. We knew not to get on the freeway, and we took a different route, and then we heard that there was a traffic accident on the freeway. You just take one of those times when you were guided, close your eyes, and recall, how did you know you were guided? And meditate on that. And for some people, if you don't, in my workshop, I spend a half a day to a day helping people to get to this place where they know their inner guidance like the back of their hand. For you, having a few minutes with you in a webinar, it may take you meditating on this several times, where you just sit down and try to remember that time in as much detail as possible. What was happening inside you? What pictures were you seeing? What were you hearing? What were you feeling? And remember how I had a gut feeling and how I could describe it, how it was warm and it was moving and it was expansive. What do you feel? If you feel, because you may not feel, but you might, when you have guidance. Or what do you hear? Do you have a voice? If so, where's yours? And what does it sound like? Do you see things? Do you see a picture? If so, where's the picture? And what does it sound? What does it look like? So you just begin the exploration of your internal world. And just through the intention of wanting to get to know your inner guidance better and sitting and meditating with that, you will begin to get more consciousness around it. Little things done consistently over time make a huge difference in our lives. So even if you spent just a couple of minutes in the morning or the evening meditating on this every day, and even if you got no results or no consciousness from it for a while, eventually I can guarantee you that you will start to gain consciousness and knowingness or with regard to your inner guidance and your intuition. So that's step one. You got to get to know it like it's the back of your hand, and I presented it in a very simple way. Usually we take about a day for that. Step two, you got to slow down and get present. Most people are very habituated in moving about their day. They're cruising through their day quickly. They're making their decisions in the normal way that they make them. And so you've got to create an interruption of that pattern. And so I suggest that you have a couple of times during the day where you slow down. You take some deep breaths and you really get present. You really reflect inside yourself on, hey, what's really going on here? What's driving my decisions right now? What's present, right? And I'm going to tell you the next step is going to be getting to know the things that can get in the way of guidance. And that's a big part. When you go to step two and you slow down and you get present, well, what's there? Because usually if you are intending to be guided or to have intuition, most of the time when you get present, one of two things will be there. Either your intuition will be there, or something that's in the way of it will be there. Now that something might be doubt, right? Your intuition might be there, but you might doubt whether that's it. Or that something that's there that's not intuition can be any number of things from that list that I put up earlier. It could be your wants, your attachments, logic, reasoning, practicality, time, money, emotion, fear of lost rapport. I mean, this is one that happens in business. I had a venture capitalist out on one of my one-week retreats. We spend a week in a place like Hawaii or Mount Shasta following our inner guidance or practicing it, right? And we do it out in nature in places that amplify our connection to spirit. And so it's an incredible place to learn it because there's nothing at stake like there is in your normal business world. You get to actually, do I go on this trail or not? Do I sit here and meditate or not? It's a very powerful, amplified container. And I had this venture capitalist out there, and she was really learning it. I mean, it was powerfully coming through for her. It was her first experience like that because she was quite a left-brain person being a venture capitalist. But at one moment she said, well, God, what are my colleagues going to think if I tell them that I'm making decisions from intuition? You know, and that's what I call like the fear of lost rapport, right? Like that people won't like me. And rapport is important in business. You know, rapport is like a, you know, like-mindedness. You know, people like to do business with people like them. And so, you know, the fear of losing that can stop us from following guidance, right? And yet, that following guidance can also bring us rapport. For example, I one time was guided to wear my logoed shirts that I had for my business to work one day. My sales manager, he showed up in his logoed shirt as well. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're both wearing our logoed shirts and we have an appointment today. We're going to look ridiculous. And so I was going to go home and change. And yet my inner guidance powerfully told me, wear the shirt. It's okay that we're going to look like Twinkies. And so, you know, and I hardly ever wore this shirt anyway, so it was really weird for me in the first place. So anyway, I wore the shirt. We went out to this business meeting, and amazingly, the business that we went to call on, every person at their business was wearing a logoed shirt from their business. And so the fact that we were wearing our logoed shirts somehow put us into rapport with them. It made us more like them and more likely for them to like us and do business with us. And they did. You know, another time when the people who eventually bought my company, they were flying in town from New York, a team of them, to take a look at the books and to meet and have lunch and all that. And that day when I woke up, I was guided to put on a blue shirt and a blue sport coat. Now, I never wore sport coats. I never wore suits. I wore slacks and a shirt or jeans and a shirt every day to work. Even if I went to see the banker or the lawyer, I didn't put on a jacket. If I was going to dress up for something, in the rare instance that that was called for, I would put on a tie. I was not the type to wear a shirt and a jacket with no tie. Except this day, it was clear, and I did. And I showed up at the work that day, and these guys walked in the office. There were 4 of them. 3 out of 4 of them were wearing a blue shirt and a blue jacket. Now, these things are subtle, but they make a difference. So, you know, trusting that there's a part of us that knows beyond what we can know with our logical minds, and then letting the chips fall where they may. You know, so that's enough about the things that can get in the way of guidance. I spend often an entire day on going through all of the things that can get in the way of guidance one by one, and then giving examples of them so that you can relate it to your world. And that kind of consciousness around what can get in the way of our guidance is extremely powerful. And so I tell people to spend time with that. You know, when you're making a decision, stop, pause, and notice how you're making it. If there's a reason that you're making the decision that you can point to, oftentimes that's actually not guidance. You know, guidance just comes in a moment of clarity and says, this is it. And you can then point to reasons that make sense, but that's not the reason. The reason is guidance. That's the difference. So the other thing is, if you have any tools that you've learned, and being life coaches, I'm sure perhaps you guys all have tools of how to move things, because part of the model that I teach is that when you have these things that are in the way, you then apply tools to move them out of the way. So just take all the tools that you've learned and pick the one that seems most appropriate. If there's an emotion present, use a tool that shifts emotions and get that emotion to shift. I spend a day or a half a day teaching tools of shifting things out of the way that are in the way of our guidance. And so before we go, I want to offer you quickly just a little bit more as a takeaway, some things that you can do to increase and develop your guidance, and you're using your guidance to grow your business. These are basically what I always recommend people is that they take on simple, non-threatening practices, right? Like, don't start trying to use your intuition on whether you're going to hire, the next CEO of your company, or you're going to, don't make really big decisions with your guidance until you've practiced it with the littler ones. So start practicing, whether you want to take a particular phone call or not, whether it's the truth. Or you can even practice with knowing actually who's on the phone call. You can also practice in a non-business related format, but one that'll teach you in a big way with food, what to eat. And you get to find out, do I feel good after that meal or not? What restaurants to go to? Was it a good meal or not? Choose with your guidance. Choose what clothing you're going to wear. Notice if other people show up with that clothing. Choose which prospects you're going to call on. Spend a little bit of time every day meditating for guidance. Like, do a practice, like just for a couple minutes. Pick something that you want to know about and meditate and ask for intuition on it. And then, if you have the time, this is one that will really, really help you. If you can take a day, you can do it for a few hours or a half a day, but ultimately, if you have an entire day and you can take the entire day and just get in your car and just follow guidance that day, and stuff comes up in the way, then move through it, sit with it, move it out of the way, and just follow guidance the whole day. It will cement it deeply, deeply inside of you. So I had a question come in about hiring, and they're deciding between two candidates. Do they just sit there with the different resumes and wait? And the answer is yes. You sit there and you tune in deeply on the inside as to whether one of those resumes gives you a different information set on the inside. Do you get a certain feeling inside when you contemplate one versus the other? Do you get any pictures that are different when you contemplate one versus the other? Do you hear a voice inside your mind that tells you anything about one versus the other? And by the way, I've been able to spend just a little bit of time talking about how to develop the relationship between you and your guidance, because in order to do what I'm telling you now, you have to know the difference between what is guidance inside of me and what's not. So I want to offer you guys, I've got an article that I've written. It's 10 things you can do to help improve your inner guidance. And it gets into a little bit more detail about how to distinguish your guidance from anything else, which is essential to answer this question. And so if you will send me an email to Magick, M-A-G-I-C-K, at sacredvoyages.com, I'd be happy to send you this article. And that way, maybe it can help you to develop it a little bit more. But yes, that's what you do. You sit and meditate on the two candidates and see what information comes through. Journaling can also help. Just journal. Sit down and journal about it and see what comes through in your journaling. That engages the unconscious, the right brain, stream of consciousness journaling, just going and going and going, can be incredibly useful, and I would highly suggest that. So we are about to run out of time, and I feel like there's so much more that I would like to have been able to get into with you and to teach you, and that I was able to give you definitely some practical take-home tips. And this is a practice, and really the first step of getting conscious in this practice, it takes a little bit of time. And in an hour webinar, that's not quite enough time for me to really get into the detail that I would like to be able to give you a real jump start on this. And so what I would suggest is I've got a few things. One, like I said, send me an email, Magick, M-A-G-I-C-K, at sacredvoyages.com, and I'll send you that article. Secondly, I have a DVD set that hundreds and hundreds of hours of editing went into this DVD set. It came from filming multiple classes of me teaching a comprehensive model for inner guidance. It's a step-by-step approach where I flush out in great detail everything we've been talking about in a very simple way. It has lots of illustration. It has tools and exercises It's got lots of visuals, so it's not boring. It's got all kinds of different visual overlays, so you're not just watching a talking head. And it's incredibly powerful. In fact, that class, I've had people who teach, life coaches whose sole purpose is to teach people inner guidance, who, when they took this course, their entire life just exploded with good things and prosperity and abundance. I mean, it can take anybody to the next level. And so the DVDs, they just came out recently. The introductory rate on them is $129, but if you would like to buy one today and you're on this call, send me an email at that same address, and I will give you a price of $89 today. And they're very comprehensive. It's 3 DVDs with a lot of material. Also, I'd like to let you know that I do schedule inner guidance retreats from time to time, and typically they are scheduled based on demand. So if you write me and let me know that you're interested in a retreat, then that might spark us to have a retreat in which you could attend. We are having a retreat coming up in Mount Shasta, California, and that one is in September. And Mount Shasta is a very powerful place, and a place that, being in nature and in connection with the earth and spending a week together in a closed container with the sole intention of developing and connecting with our inner guidance will change you forever. So if you're interested in that retreat, please let me know, and I can get you more information about it. Let's see, is there anything else that I'd like to tell you today? I think that is it. So I thank you for attending the call. I hope it's okay that I might have gone over by a couple of minutes. And I'm going to ask Kathy also to possibly put the article up for you guys somewhere where you can see it. And thank you very much for your time. And if you'd like to go to my website and find out more about what I'm up to, it's sacredvoyages.com. That's www.sacredvoyages.com. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy your evening.
Magick, thank you so much. I think you did a great job of keeping up with the questions and just incorporating them naturally into your presentation. So thank you for that, as those were getting fed to you. So that was excellent. I've had a couple of people that were saying thank you. They appreciated the webinar today. They did have to go because of scheduling and that kind of thing. I welcome those who want to stay on afterwards and ask additional questions. Let us know how we can be of service. That's fabulous. And I do want to thank everybody for your time and participation. The webinar will be posted on our YouTube channel, so you'll have access to it in the future. So thank you, Magick, and thank you to all of those of you on the call. And Magick, at this point, I'm inviting the people that are on the call can either type in a question if they would like to type a question in, and if they want to come live, if you raise your hand, those of you that are still on the call, if you raise your hand on your screen, I will unmute you so that you can ask a question live and have that opportunity. So I'm monitoring both of those and watching that. And Magick, just to give you a heads up, the comments that are coming in on the question panel are really thanks and that they appreciate it. So very good.
Thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed it greatly, and I'm happy to hang around if anybody has any more questions.
No, excellent. And Magick, for the article, if you want, happy to get it up on the blog so that people can see it there. And so you and I can touch base on that offline. And then, of course, we'll have this recording up on YouTube. So should be all set, all right?
Yep, that sounds great, Kathy. Very good.
And I think I'm down to just like a person or two, and they're probably just hanging out to see if anything else comes up, and more of the thanks got to go coming in. So we are all set. So thank you, Magick, and we'll be in touch and talking soon.
All right. Thank you very much, Kathy, and thanks everybody out there.